What's the worst betrayal you can imagine? Is it the sting of a lie from someone you trust? Or is it the slow, creeping realization that the person you welcomed into your family, into your life, is nothing but a phantom, a carefully constructed mask hiding a monster? For me, it started with a bottle of whiskey, a gift for my 60th birthday from my son-in-law, Mark. He presented it with a flourish, a grand gesture from a man who believed he was the master of his universe, a man who saw me as little more than a relic, the doddering old fool who'd built an empire he now planned to inherit. He had no idea that this single bottle, this symbol of his arrogance, would become the very instrument of his downfall. He couldn't have possibly conceived that I would place that same bottle into the hands of his own father, and in that simple act, uncork a truth so toxic it would dissolve his entire world. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had a smile while your blood boiled, then stick around. You're going to want to hear this. My story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming what is yours, about justice in its purest, most devastating form. And I promise you, by the end, you'll understand why some secrets should never, ever be bottled up. Let me take you back. Before Mark, my life had a certain rhythm to it, a quiet satisfaction built on decades of hard work and principled living. I'm not a man who was born into wealth. I built my construction company from the ground up, with calloused hands and a mind that saw blueprints in my sleep. I believed in tangible things, solid foundations, level floors, and promises kept. My wife, Eleanor, had been my partner in every sense of the word until she passed away a decade ago, leaving a void that I thought would never be filled. But she left me with the greatest creation of our lives, our daughter, Sarah. Sarah is my world. She has her mother's compassionate heart and my stubborn resilience. After Eleanor was gone, raising Sarah became the singular focus of my existence. I poured everything into her, not just resources, but time, attention, and a deep-seated desire to see her happy and secure. I wanted her to have the choices I never did, to pursue her passions without the gnawing anxiety of financial instability. She became an art curator, a profession that suited her elegant soul, and her success was a source of immense pride for me. When she brought Mark home, I saw what she saw. He was handsome, undeniably so, with a practiced charm that could disarm a battalion. He worked in finance, a world of abstract numbers and high-stakes gambles that was entirely foreign to my concrete and steel reality. He spoke of markets and mergers with a dizzying confidence, and he looked at Sarah with an adoration that seemed, at the time, entirely genuine. He said all the right things, laughed at my old stories, and called me sir with a reverence that, I now realize, was pure performance. I wanted to believe in him because Sarah did. A father's love can be a powerful blinder. We see our children's happiness, and we mistake it for our own. So I welcomed him. When they decided to marry, I paid for the wedding, a grand affair at a historic estate that cost more than my first 3 houses combined. I didn't blink. Nothing was too good for my daughter. When they wanted to buy a house, I gave them the down payment as a gift, a beautiful colonial in a neighborhood with sprawling oaks and good schools. I wanted them to build a life on a foundation as solid as any I had ever poured. And when Mark mentioned, with calculated casualness, that he was feeling unfulfilled at his high-pressure firm, that he wanted to do something more real, I made him an offer that would change all of our lives. I brought him into my company. Not as a laborer, of course. I created a position for him, Chief Financial Officer. My own CFO, a man named George who had been with me for 30 years, was nearing retirement. I thought, who better to trust with the financial future of my legacy than my own son-in-law? Who better to safeguard the company I intended to one day leave to Sarah and her children? It was a decision born of love and a profound, misguided trust. George, ever the pragmatist, was skeptical. He agreed to stay on for a year to show Mark the ropes, a transition period I insisted upon. I remember George's words to me in a private meeting. "He's slick, Robert," he'd said, his brow furrowed. "He knows the lingo, but I'm not sure he knows the work. Be careful." I dismissed it as the caution of an old guard, a man naturally wary of his replacement. I told George that Mark was family, And in my world, family was the ultimate bond, the one contract that needed no signature. That was my first great mistake. For the next 2 years, life was idyllic on the surface. Mark and Sarah hosted Sunday dinners. He would talk about streamlining operations and maximizing profits, using a vocabulary that made it all sound incredibly impressive. The company's bottom line did seem to improve, or at least the reports he showed me indicated as much. I was spending more time at my lake house, trying to master the art of retirement, content in the belief that my legacy was in capable hands. I had given him everything: my company, my trust, my daughter. And he took it all with a smile on his face and a void in his heart where a conscience should have been. The betrayal wasn't a sudden cataclysm. It was a slow, seeping poison, and the first drop fell on the evening of my 60th birthday. My daughter, Sarah, had thrown me a surprise party at their house, the one I had helped them buy. It was a beautiful evening filled with friends, family, and the warm glow of a life well lived. I was genuinely happy, surrounded by the people I loved, feeling the comforting weight of a legacy I believed was secure. Mark, ever the showman, insisted on making the final toast of the evening. He stood, glass in hand, the picture of the devoted son-in-law. "To Robert," he began, his voice smooth and confident, resonating through the quieted room. "A man who taught me the meaning of building something that lasts. He built a company, he built a family, and he built a life of integrity. I can only hope to live up to the example he has set." He paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air, then smiled that brilliant, predatory smile of his. "And since a man of his stature deserves only the finest, I have a special gift for him." He produced a box, elegantly wrapped, and presented it to me with a theatrical bow. Inside was a bottle of whiskey. But not just any whiskey. It was a 25-year-old single malt from a legendary, now-closed distillery. A collector's item. A bottle that I knew, from my own modest interest in fine spirits, was worth several $1,000s. I was taken aback, genuinely touched by the extravagance. "Mark, this is too much," I stammered, holding the heavy, dust-kissed bottle. "Nonsense," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Only the best for the best." "Happy birthday, Dad," the room applauded. Sarah beamed, her eyes shining with pride for her thoughtful, generous husband. I felt a lump in my throat, a surge of affirmation that my trust in him had been well placed. That night, I placed the bottle in the center of my liquor cabinet, a trophy symbolizing the success of my new, blended family. It sat there for about a week, an object of quiet contemplation. One evening, feeling reflective, I decided to open it. A whiskey that's special wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be savored. As I carefully cut the foil and twisted the cork, however, something felt off. The cork didn't have the satisfying, dense feel of aged, high-quality material. It felt light, almost synthetic. A tiny alarm bell, no louder than a pin dropping, sounded in the back of my mind. I dismissed it. I poured a small measure into a crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the light. I swirled it, anticipating the complex aromas, the notes of peat and oak and sherry that decades in a cask were supposed to impart. But when I brought the glass to my nose, I was met with a harsh, almost chemical scent, overlaid with the cloying sweetness of caramel coloring. The rich, nuanced bouquet I expected was completely absent. My blood ran cold. I am no master sommelier, but I have spent enough years appreciating good whiskey to know when something is profoundly wrong. I took a tentative sip. It was fire and sugar, a cheap, young liquor masquerading as something ancient and refined. There was none of the smoothness, none of the lingering, complex finish of a top-shelf single malt. It was a forgery, a cheap, insulting forgery. I stood there, in the quiet of my study, the glass trembling in my hand. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the whiskey itself. It was about the audacity, the sheer, contemptuous disrespect of it all. Mark hadn't just given me a gift. He had staged a performance. He had stood in a room full of our friends and family, praised my integrity, and then handed me a lie in a bottle. He was so convinced of my senility, of my irrelevance, that he believed I would never know the difference. He thought I was a doddering old fool, a brand name he could slap on his own cheap product. That was the moment the mask fell, not his, but mine. The hurt was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir. A cold, quiet rage. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had declared war, and he had no idea, not the slightest inkling, of the enemy he had just made. In that moment, holding a glass of fake whiskey, I made a silent vow. I would not confront him. I would not rage. I would do what I had always done. I would be patient. I would gather my materials, and I would build him a coffin so perfect, so precisely engineered, he would be buried in it before he even knew he was dead. The first phase of my plan was observation. The bottle of fraudulent whiskey sat on my shelf, no longer a trophy, but a monument to my son-in-law's deceit. Every morning, I would look at it, and it would fuel the cold fire that had ignited within me. An old lesson from my early days in construction kept replaying in my mind. Before you can fix a problem, you have to understand the full extent of the rot. A surface crack can sometimes indicate a catastrophic failure in the foundation. Mark's lie about the whiskey was a surface crack, and I needed to know how deep the rot went. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to George, my old CFO, the man I had so callously pushed aside for Mark. I invited him to my lake house under the guise of a friendly fishing trip, a pastime we had shared for years. As we sat on the dock, the calm water reflecting the clear autumn sky, I confessed my suspicions. I didn't lead with the whiskey. I started with a feeling, a gut instinct that something was wrong at the company. I told him I felt disconnected, that Mark's financial reports, with their endless jargon and slick graphs, felt more like a sales pitch than a balance sheet. George listened patiently, his weathered face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, reeling in his line with a slow, methodical rhythm. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled not with a triumphant, "I told you so," but with a deep, weary sadness. "Robert," he said, his voice low, "I didn't want to be the one to tell you. I hope you would see it for yourself. The numbers are smoke and mirrors. He's been moving money around, setting up new vendor accounts that I don't recognize. He uses terminology designed to confuse, to make you feel like you're not smart enough to question it. He's bleeding you dry, but he's doing it with 1,000 small cuts, so you don't notice the blood loss until you collapse." The words confirmed my worst fears, but hearing them from George, a man whose integrity was as solid as bedrock, made them real. He told me that when he had tried to question some of the new accounts, Mark had been dismissive, patronizing. He told George that he was stuck in the old way of doing things, and that this was a more aggressive, agile approach to asset management. It was corporate doublespeak for theft. George had quietly made copies of some of the more suspicious invoices before he left, a precaution born of a lifetime of caution. He had them in a file at his home. "I couldn't prove anything definitively," George said, "not without a full audit. But my gut tells me it's bad. Very bad." We didn't talk about it again for the rest of the day. We fished, we shared a thermos of coffee, and we spoke of old times. But a new, unspoken partnership had been forged between us. We were the old guard, and we were going to protect the kingdom from the usurper prince. The next day, I acted on George's information. I hired a forensic accountant, a discreet professional recommended by a trusted colleague. Her name was Ms. Albright, a woman with iron gray hair, piercing blue eyes, and an almost preternatural ability to find order in chaos. I gave her George's files and limited, remote access to the company's servers, explaining that I wanted a quiet, preliminary audit to assess the performance of my new CFO. I asked for absolute confidentiality. She simply nodded, her expression betraying nothing. While Ms. Albright began her digital excavation, I turned my attention to Mark's personal life. The whiskey told me he was a man who held others in contempt. A man like that, I reasoned, rarely confines his deceptions to a single arena. If he was cheating me in business, what was he doing to my daughter? The thought was a shard of ice in my heart. This part was harder. It felt like a violation of Sarah's privacy, a betrayal of my own. But I had to know. I had to know the full measure of the man my daughter was married to. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Frank, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a black and white movie. He was gruff, expensive, and by all accounts, brutally effective. I gave him a photograph of Mark and a simple instruction. I want to know everything. His routine, his associates, his expenses. I want to know who he is when he thinks no one is watching. Frank just grunted and said he'd be in touch. The next few weeks were an exercise in excruciating patience. I had to maintain the illusion of the happy, semi-retired patriarch. I attended Sunday dinners at their house, smiling and nodding as Mark pontificated about his latest business triumphs. I had to listen to him call me Dad and resist the urge to shatter the wine glass in my hand. I played the part of the doting grandfather-to-be, asking them about their plans for children, all the while knowing he was systematically dismantling the legacy I had built for them. It was the hardest performance of my life. I wore the mask of blissful ignorance, and it was suffocating. During this time, I also began to cultivate a relationship with a man I had known only superficially. Mark's father, David. David was the complete opposite of his son. He was a retired high school history teacher, a man of modest means but immense integrity. He was quiet, thoughtful, and possessed a gentle decency that Mark seemed to view as a weakness to be exploited. I invited David out for lunch, then for a round of golf. I found myself genuinely liking him. We talked about history, about our wives, about the quiet joys and anxieties of watching our children build their own lives. In one of our conversations, David spoke of Mark with a kind of baffled pride. He was always so ambitious, David said, shaking his head. So driven to be more than I was. I just hope he remembers the things that truly matter. I just nodded, the irony a bitter taste in my mouth. I was laying the groundwork, brick by painful brick. Ms. Albright would provide the financial proof. Frank would provide the personal proof. And David, in his own unwitting way, would become the moral compass, the embodiment of the values Mark had so thoroughly desecrated. The reports started coming in, and each one was a new layer of hell. Ms. Albright's weekly summaries were delivered in discreet, unmarked envelopes. Her findings were clinical, precise, and utterly damning. Mark had established several shell corporations registered to post office boxes. These companies, with names like Innovative Logistical Solutions and Strategic Asset Procurement, were billing my firm for services that were never rendered and materials that were never delivered. He was approving the payments himself, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company I had built into his own private accounts. He was using my legacy as his personal ATM. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. He had been doing this almost from the day he started. He had seen my trust not as a gift, but as a vulnerability, an open door to a vault he felt entitled to empty. Each transaction, each forged invoice, was another shovel of dirt on the grave he was digging for my company. Reading those reports, I felt a strange sense of detachment, the cold calm of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal disease. The emotional shock had passed, replaced by a methodical resolve. But Frank's reports were different. They were personal. They were a violation. Frank was efficient, his updates delivered via a secure messaging app, usually accompanied by grainy photographs that made my stomach clench. He quickly established Mark's routine. Twice a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mark would leave the office claiming he had a late client dinner. He would drive to a sleek, impersonal condominium tower in the city's financial district, a place I knew Sarah had never been. He would be met in the lobby by a woman. Frank sent a photo. She was young, immaculately dressed, with the same kind of polished, artificial beauty as Mark. They would go up to an apartment, and he wouldn't leave until after midnight. Frank ran the woman's name. She was a marketing associate at one of the banks Mark supposedly did business with. He had been seeing her for over a year. He was buying her gifts, expensive jewelry, and designer clothes, all paid for with a credit card I soon learned was secretly tied to one of the shell corporations. He was funding his affair with the money he stole from me. He was cheating on my daughter with my own money. This was the cut that drew the most blood. I would look at Sarah during our family dinners, see the genuine love and trust in her eyes as she looked at her husband, and I would feel a rage so profound it was almost paralyzing. How could he sit there, accepting her affection, while living such a despicable lie? How could he talk about their future about the children they planned to have, knowing his entire life was a sham. The mask I wore grew heavier with each passing day. I had a faint interest in his fabricated stories, smile at his empty compliments, and listen to him patronize me with his supposed business acumen. One evening, he had the gall to give me advice. "Robert," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug look, "you built a great company, a real legacy, but you were too conservative. You left a lot of money on the table. I'm just modernizing things, unlocking its true potential." I just smiled and said, "I'm glad you're here to steer the ship, son. My time is past." The words almost choked me. He bought it completely. He saw what he wanted to see, a feeble old man, grateful to be put out to pasture. He had no idea the old man was sitting in the crow's nest, watching the iceberg that was waiting to rip his hull to shreds. I collected the evidence meticulously. Every report from Ms. Albright, every photograph from Frank, was downloaded to an encrypted hard drive. I compiled a complete narrative of his betrayal, a dossier of his deceit, cross-referencing financial transactions with the dates of his illicit trysts. It was a monument to his depravity, built with cold, hard facts. During this period, my friendship with his father, David, deepened. I found a genuine solace in his company. He represented a world of decency and honor that his son had completely abandoned. We discovered a shared passion for woodworking, and we started spending Saturdays in my workshop building a small boat. As we worked, sanding the wood and fitting the joints, we would talk. I learned about his disappointment in Mark's relentless materialism, his sadness that his son never seemed to find contentment. "He's always chasing something," David once said, his hands dusty with sawdust. "A bigger title, a fancier car. He thinks that's what a successful life looks like." I try to teach him that character is what you build when no one is watching. That sentence hung in the air between us. Character is what you build when no one is watching, and I was watching. I knew exactly what Mark was building, and soon the whole world would see it too. I was assembling my tools, gathering my materials, and preparing to bring the entire rotten structure of his life crashing down. The whiskey bottle remained on my shelf, catching the afternoon sun, a silent, patient sentinel. It had started this journey, and I decided, with a grim sense of poetry, that it would also be there to end it. The time had come to choose the perfect moment, the perfect stage for the final act. An opportunity presented itself, so perfect in its poetic justice that it felt as if the universe itself were conspiring to deliver my revenge. Mark's parents, David and Mary, were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. To mark the occasion, Mark and Sarah were hosting a large, catered party at their home. It was to be a grand affair, a testament to enduring love and family bonds. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. Mark, the architect of deceit, was going to host a celebration of fidelity. He was going to stand before his friends and family in the house that I had paid for, a house that served as the very headquarters of his betrayal, and toast to 4 decades of loyalty. It was perfect. This party would be my arena. The guest list was a cross-section of our lives. Old family friends, neighbors, colleagues from my company, including many who had worked for me for decades, and, of course, David and Mary's own circle of friends, people who had known Mark since he was a boy. The audience would be composed of everyone whose respect he craved and everyone whose trust he had violated. The weeks leading up to the party were the final, meticulous phase of my preparation. The slow burn was over. The pace was beginning to quicken. I met with Ms. Albright and Frank one last time to receive their final reports. The dossier was complete. The financial malfeasance totaled just over $12 million. The evidence of the affair was irrefutable, complete with hotel receipts, gift purchases, and a timeline of their meetings that was as detailed as a train schedule. I took all of this information, the spreadsheets, the bank statements, the photographs, the text messages, and I had my tech-savvy grandson, Sarah's cousin Leo, help me put it all together. Leo was a computer science prodigy, and he understood discretion. I told him only that I needed to create a secure, private website to present some sensitive business information. He didn't ask questions. He built a simple, elegant website, password-protected and untraceable. The homepage was a single, stark title. The Mark Project, a study in deceit. It was organized into two sections: professional betrayal and personal betrayal. Each section was a methodical, undeniable chronicle of his crimes. The final touch was the delivery mechanism. Leo created a QR code that linked directly to the website. I had the code printed on a small, high-quality card, the kind you might use as a place card at a formal dinner. I made 100 of them. Then I turned my attention to the whiskey. For months, it had been my silent co-conspirator. I took the bottle with its fraudulent contents and rewrapped it in the original expensive paper and ribbons for my birthday. I attached a simple gift tag. On it I wrote, "For David, a man who understands the value of authenticity. Happy anniversary." And on the back of that tag, I affixed one of the QR code stickers. My loyal ally, George, was also part of the plan. I had met with him and walked him through the broad strokes of what was about to happen. His role was simple but crucial. He was to be there, and he was to be ready to corroborate the financial details if anyone dared to question them. He agreed without hesitation, a grim look of determination on his face. The night of the party arrived. It was a crisp, clear evening. I walked into the house that should have been a home for my daughter, and I was met with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Mark was in his element, gliding through the crowd, his arm possessively around Sarah's waist. He was the lord of the manor, the master of ceremonies. He saw me, and his smile widened. "Robert, glad you could make it," he boomed, pulling me into a one-armed hug. It felt like being embraced by a snake. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, son," I said, my voice even, my heart beating a slow, steady drumbeat of anticipation. I handed him the wrap bottle. "This is for your father." He glanced at the tag. "Ah, regifting good stuff, I see. Don't worry, my secret's safe with you." He chuckled, winking as if we were partners in some harmless crime. He had no idea. The casual way he dismissed the gift, the lie he thought we now shared, only strengthened my resolve. He placed the bottle on a table laden with other gifts for David and Mary. The trap was set. For the next hour, I played my part. I mingled. I made small talk. I accepted condolences on my slowing down and compliments on how sharp Mark was. All the while, I was observing, waiting, and with a dark, ironic satisfaction, I watched Mark dig his own grave a little deeper with every arrogant laugh, with every proprietary touch of my daughter's arm. As the evening wore on, the time came for the toasts. Mark, of course, took the lead. He stood in the center of the living room, tapping a knife against his champagne flute. The room fell silent. He delivered a beautiful, eloquent speech about his parents. He spoke of their unwavering love, their integrity, the moral foundation they had given him. He spoke of learning from his father what it meant to be a good man, a good husband. It was a masterpiece of hypocrisy, and he delivered it without a flicker of shame. The room was captivated. Sarah was crying softly, her face filled with love. David and Mary looked on, their hearts swelling with pride. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. He then turned to me, and of course, a special thanks to my father-in-law, Robert, who has given me so much. A mentor, a friend, and the best damn father-in-law guy could ask for more applause. My turn. I had told Sarah I wanted to say a few words. She smiled at me encouragingly. I walked to the center of the room, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me. I didn't hold a champagne glass. My hands were empty. I began calmly, my voice steady. "David, Mary, 40 years. It's a remarkable achievement. It's the kind of achievement that can only be built on one thing, a foundation of absolute, unwavering trust." I paused, letting the word trust hang in the air. I looked around the room, making eye contact with old friends, with my loyal employees, with Sarah. Then my eyes settled on Mark. Trust is a precious thing. It's a simple thing. You either have it or you don't. You're either a person of your word, or you are nothing. The festive mood in the room began to shift, replaced by a subtle, creeping tension. Mark's smile became a little more rigid. Family, especially, I continued, is built on that trust. We welcome people into our lives, into our homes, into our businesses. We give them our most precious gift, our faith in them. I walked over to the gift table and picked up the wrap bottle of whiskey. Mark gave me a bottle of whiskey, very much like this one, for my 60th birthday. He told me it was the best, a symbol of quality, a symbol of authenticity. I began to unwrap it slowly, deliberately. He made a beautiful speech that night, too, about integrity, about living up to a legacy. I held up the unwrapped bottle for all to see. But you see, there was a problem. The whiskey inside wasn't authentic. It was a fake, a cheap imitation dressed up as something valuable. A murmur went through the crowd. Mark's face had gone pale. He started to take a step forward, a protest forming on his lips, but I held up a hand to stop him. At first, I was just hurt, I said, my voice dropping, becoming more confessional. I thought, why the disrespect? Why the lie? But then I realized a small lie can sometimes be a symptom of a much bigger one. It could be a surface crack that hints at a catastrophic failure in the foundation. I turned to David. David, your son gave a beautiful speech just now about the lessons you taught him, about what it means to be a good man. I think it's only fitting that you have this gift. But before you take it, I think you and everyone else here should understand the full story of the man your son has become. The man he is when he thinks no one is watching. I looked directly at Mark, whose face was now a mask of pure panic. You wanted to unlock the company's potential. Mark, you wanted to modernize it? Let's show everyone your work. Let's look at the new foundation you've built. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small stack of cards with the QR code. I began handing them to the people nearest to me. If you have a smartphone, I announced, my voice ringing with authority, I invite you to scan this code. It will take you to a small presentation I've put together. It's called The Mark Project Considered an Audit. A full and final accounting of my son-in-law's contributions. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustle of cards and the faint chime of smartphones being unlocked. Then came the first gasp. Someone muttered, "Oh my God," all across the room. Faces were illuminated by the cold glow of their screens, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock, to disgust, to pity. People were scrolling through spreadsheets that detailed the embezzlement, the shell corporations with fake invoices bleeding my company dry. They were staring at photographs of Mark, clear as day, kissing a woman who was not my daughter, entering an apartment that was not his home. They were reading transcripts of text messages filled with sickeningly sweet lies to his mistress and cold, calculated deceptions to his wife. Mark stood frozen, his skin ashen. He looked like a man who had just watched his own ghost walk through the door. His eyes darted around the room, but every gaze he met was filled with contempt. There was no escape. The digital evidence was absolute, displayed simultaneously in the hands of 50 different people. He turned to Sarah, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. Sarah was staring at her phone, her hand over her mouth, her body trembling with silent, violent sobs. The sound of her heartbreak was the loudest thing in the room. He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Sarah, I can explain," but she flinched away from him as if his touch were acid. Her eyes, when she finally looked up at him, were not filled with sadness, but with a horrifying, dead clarity. The woman he had married was gone, replaced by a stranger who was seeing him for the very first time. The climax was not a loud explosion, but a deafening, soul-crushing silence, punctuated by the quiet clicks and scrolls of his entire world unraveling in real time. The initial shockwave of the reveal gave way to a chaotic, churning aftermath. The party, once a celebration of love, devolved into a scene of quiet horror. People didn't shout, they whispered. They gathered in small, stunned clusters, averting their eyes from the central figures of the drama, as if looking at the sun. Mark stood, isolated in the center of the room, a pariah in his own home. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a pathetic, twitching creature of pure desperation. He tried again, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Sarah, please. Let's go somewhere and talk about this." Sarah finally moved. She walked not towards him, but towards me. She didn't speak. She just came into my arms and held on, her body racked with the kind of sobs that come from the deepest, most broken part of the soul. I held my daughter, stroking her hair, my heart aching for her pain, but knowing, with a terrible certainty, that this brutal surgery was necessary to save her life. The most powerful moment, however, came from David. Throughout the entire reveal, he had stood motionless, his face a granite mask of disbelief. He hadn't looked at his phone. He didn't need to. He had watched the truth dawn on the faces of everyone else in the room. He finally walked forward and stood before his son. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet disappointment in his tone was more devastating than any shout could have been. "I asked you," David said, his voice trembling with a barely controlled fury, "to be a good man. Not a rich man. Not a successful man. Just a good one. That's all your mother and I ever wanted." He looked down at the bottle of whiskey still sitting on the gift table. "You took your grandfather's name, a man of honor, and you have made it worthless." He then turned, took his wife Mary's arm, and without another word, without a single backward glance, they walked out of the house. That was the moment Mark truly broke. The judgment of strangers was one thing, but the quiet finality of his father's exit was the killing blow. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, a man utterly and completely ruined. The party dissolved quickly after that. People left in a quiet, somber procession, offering me brief, sympathetic glances. George came over, put a hand on my shoulder, and simply said, "Justice, Robert." I nodded, feeling no elation, only a profound, hollow sense of necessity. I took Sarah home with me that night. She didn't say a word during the drive. She just stared out the window, the tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. There were no words of comfort that could possibly suffice, so I offered her the only thing I could, my silent, unwavering presence. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of legal and emotional triage. The resolution was as swift and merciless as the climax had been. The first thing I did the next morning was change the locks at the company and freeze all accounts. I met with my board and George, presenting them with a full dossier from Ms. Albright. There was no debate. We immediately terminated Mark's employment and filed a criminal complaint for embezzlement. The district attorney, seeing the mountain of clear-cut evidence, took the case enthusiastically. Mark was arrested a week later. The sight of him in handcuffs on the local news was a surreal, grim punctuation mark on the whole affair. Sarah, with a strength that humbled me, filed for divorce. Her grief was immense, but it was clean. There were no lingering doubts, no what-ifs. The betrayal had been so absolute, so comprehensively proven, that it cauterized the wound as it was inflicted. She was not mourning the man he was, but the man she had believed him to be. Our conversations were long and difficult. We sat for hours in my study, the very room where I had first tasted the fake whiskey, and she slowly pieced together the last few years of her life, re-examining memories through the new, harsh lens of the truth. She saw the small lies, the inconsistencies, the subtle manipulations she had once dismissed. It was a painful but necessary process of reclaiming her own reality. The legal consequences for Mark were severe. Faced with irrefutable evidence, he pleaded guilty to grand larceny and fraud. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison with a restitution order for the $12 million he had stolen. His assets were seized, including the house, which, given that it was purchased with a down payment from me and maintained with stolen funds, was returned to my name. He lost everything: his job, his wife, his family, his freedom. His father, David, refused to see him or speak to him. In a world that Mark had built on image and perception, he had become a non-entity, erased by his own actions. I sold the house. Neither Sarah nor I could ever set foot in it again. It was tainted. I used the money from the sale, along with the recovered funds from the company, to set up a foundation in my late wife's name, a foundation dedicated to supporting young female artists, a cause that was dear to both her and Sarah. It was a way of transforming the ugliest chapter of our lives into something beautiful and lasting, a way of building something new and clean from the rubble. Months have passed now. The storm has subsided. Sarah has slowly begun to heal. She has thrown herself into her work at the gallery, finding solace and purpose in art. Her laughter is returning, a little at a time. It's a different laugh than before, less naive, perhaps, but stronger, more resilient. We talk often, our bond forged even tighter in the crucible of this betrayal. As for me, I don't feel the dark satisfaction I thought I might. There is no joy in witnessing such complete destruction, even of someone who so thoroughly deserved it. Instead, what I feel is a profound sense of peace. It's the quiet peace of a house that has been put back in order, of a foundation that has been secured. I restored my company's integrity. I protected my daughter. I honored the trust that my friends, my employees, and my family had placed in me. I did what a man is supposed to do. The bottle of fake whiskey? I still have it. It sits in the back of my liquor cabinet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that masks, no matter how convincing, will always eventually slip. A reminder that truth, like a fine spirit, has a potency that can't be faked. And a reminder that the most important things we build in this life, character, integrity, trust, are the only things that truly, genuinely last. My story is a heavy one, I know. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the people we love the most can be the source of our deepest wounds. But it's also a story about resilience, about finding the strength to fight back when you've been wronged, and about the clarifying fire of justice. I did what I had to do to protect my family and my legacy, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Have you ever been in a situation where your trust was so completely shattered? How did you find the strength to move forward? Let me know your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps us all feel a little less alone in our battles. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the necessity of standing up for yourself, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more narratives about justice, empowerment, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.